Welcome back to another episode of 40 Facts About the 40K Universe. I am your host Gershwan, and today we're going to be talking about the planets of the Imperium as we get into Quarantine Worlds, or Forbidden Worlds. If you're new to the channel, subscribe. We post Warhammer 40K lore videos every single day. If you have any suggestions, please comment down below. And if you enjoy our content, thank our patrons on Patreon. It's because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. But with that said, let's get into 40 facts on Quarantine Worlds. There exist planets in the Imperium of Man that are completely off limits. These are worlds where trade, planetfall, or even simple vox communication is forbidden. They are known as Quarantine Worlds, and while they are rare, almost every sector in the galaxy contains these mysterious worlds. Rogue traders and other Imperial space travelers are well aware of the dangers of void travel, but entering a quarantine world is a guaranteed death sentence. The reasons a planet could be marked as forbidden vary, but it is often a title placed on a planet by only the most powerful organizations in the Imperium. To disobey these orders means betraying the decree of the High Lords, the Adeptus Terra, or even the dreaded Inquisition. Even if the offenders survive whatever is quarantined on the planet, they will be marked as heretics and face persecution at the highest level. Quarantine planets are either marked on Imperial maps as out of bounds, or they are removed entirely. Recently forbidden worlds will be marked accordingly and appear on most sector charts. They will also be under the supervision of the Imperial Navy, which leaves message buoys at the outskirts of the planet's void boundaries. These messages will not specify as to why the planet is restricted, but merely warn any traveler of the trouble they will get into should they fail to keep away. On even rarer occasions, the Imperial Navy will garrison a patrolling ship or orbiting weapon platform, and any trespassers will be shot on sight. Even more troubling are the quarantine worlds with planet-facing weapons meant to keep whatever is stuck on the planet from breaking free. Some of these planets are visited by a full force of Imperial battleships for a routine orbital bombardment, often done once or twice a decade. What indomitable evil can survive such an assault is a terrifying thought to even think of. Due to the regressive nature of the Imperium of Man, there are some quarantine planets that are forgotten by the Adeptus Administratum, often lost under millions of bureaucratic orders or put away in a factory-sized data store and neglected for millennia. These older, forbidden planets are often never found on updated Imperial maps, and their sector governments stop directing resources to maintain their defenses. On these planets, message buoys, orbiting weapon platforms, or any other deterrent falls to disrepair and ceases to function. The only true warnings are the ancient void legends told by old ship crew or the occasional well-versed navigator or rogue trader. Because planets are still being occasionally discovered by travelers after a long and terrible warp storm has settled or a previous Xeno threat has been taken care of, these unmarked quarantine worlds appear as fresh, new lands ripe for the taking. If the reason for their isolation is truly lost, and the threat is not apparent, then only in this scenario would a quarantine world be unknowingly resettled and reclassified, but the threat of discovery will always remain. There are nightmarish stories of the Inquisition discovering ancient edicts from ages past, which marked feudal, feral, or even sometimes hive worlds as former quarantine planets. And dependent on which faction holds power within the organization, exterminatus on a relatively law-abiding world can be called. In these situations, an appeal by a planetary governor or even a sector command will mean nothing to the Holy Order of the Inquisition, and the entire population will be wiped out without even knowing that they were marked as heretics. The most common reason a world would earn the title of a forbidden planet is if its people are suffering from some form of chaos corruption. This can mean that the population of the world knowingly or unknowingly worships the chaos gods. For example, their martial traditions might venerate a war deity that is in fact the god of blood corn, and these combat practices have forged the planet and its people into becoming a military powerhouse, and the Imperium has no choice but to try their best to keep them from spreading until the Astra Militarum can coordinate a full-force assault. In another situation, an ambitious planetary governor could be under the thrall of a Tzeentchian cult that promises political control for eternity, as long as the worshippers of Tzeentch can spread their webs of influence throughout the entire sector. In order not to divulge that the Chaos plot has been discovered, and completely lose the planet and its population to exterminatus, the sector command might order the planet quarantined until every member of the cult can be located and exterminated. On other quarantine worlds, the native beliefs that existed before the arrival of the Imperial missionaries might have blended together with the Imperial creed, and now the Adeptus Ministorum has deemed this divergent form of worship as a danger to the religion as a whole, and its practice must not be shared until further spiritual trials can be performed. While the Arch-Cardinals might not want to fully destroy the population, they also don't want any of this getting out of the planet and spreading this new ideology, and so the planet is marked as a quarantine world. A forbidden planet could also be undeniably corrupted by the powers of chaos, and everything living must remain on the surface of the planet, otherwise the chaos spreads. Tales are whispered of worlds covered with psychic storms that can corrupt everything in its path. The flora and fauna of the planet that was once ordinary is now twisted and deadly. Should any of these altered life forms make it off the world, like an invasive species, they will create chaos and death wherever they land. The teeming masses of certain quarantine worlds might be infected with a warp-based plague, often a direct result of worshipping Nurgle, the god of decay. The most well-known examples are the planets infected with the zombie plague during Abaddon's Black Crusades. Even after an orbital bombardment has wiped the planet clean of life, an order not to set foot on the world could be established until further testing could be performed. Chaotic lore might also exist on thousands of manuscripts and data slates found throughout the libraries of certain worlds. Imperial savants that have been duplicating these texts might view them with an innocent mind, but unknowingly contribute to the spread of chaos in the form of reprinted unholy books. The forbidden information found in these texts could trigger an inquisitor to mark the entire planet as a quarantine world until the proper cleaning of the planet archives could be done and all prohibited material properly burned. The rebellion or betrayal of a particular world could also lead to a forbidden classification. As a form of punishment to its people, the High Lords might quarantine the planet until multiple generations have passed and the truth of their actions forgotten by its people. A truly spiteful High Lord could also reward the failed rebellious population with castration, and should any child be found on the planet while it is quarantined, the entire world would suffer exterminatus. If the veil of reality is being thinned to the point where a psychic being could inadvertently allow a warp entity to seep into real space, the planet must be quarantined. Because most warp entities feed off the emotions given off by human populations, if a warp portal is detected on a planet, it could be in the best interest of the Imperium to remove any and all human life form from the planet, in the hopes of starving out the Psychnuans, the Enslavers, or any other warp parasite that are attracted to these psychic emanations given off by the population. Chaos sorcerers are known to enact horrible rituals to summon a warp rift. Once the rituals have been carried out, the portal will remain open based on the sorcerer's bindings. This newly created portal might be indestructible, and the only action is to quarantine the planet and destroy anything that emerges. The Imperial defenders can only pray that they will be able to wait out the demonic incursion long enough to see the warp portal close. Relics of Chaos are also a reason to quarantine a planet. If a greater demon of chaos has been trapped inside of a weapon or artifact by some Imperial saint or any other Imperial hero, then the location of the trapped demon must remain hidden as to not have its resting place disturbed for fear of releasing this great evil. Slumbering Necron tomb worlds are another reason to isolate a planet. The Ordo Xenos of the Inquisition knows that if the Necrons' awakening protocols are triggered by a human intrusion, then the entire sector might come under siege by a wrathful dynasty of undead aliens. Only small units of AdMech archaeologists with experience in dealing with Necrons can be allowed onto the quarantine world. And it's not just the Necrons that would trigger an Imperial response like this. On other worlds, the technology of ancient Xeno civilizations might be discovered, and if properly explored and exploited, then the secrets of these Xenos could save the Imperium from a similar catastrophe that wiped them out in the first place. Now when the Xenos, known as Orcs, invade a star system, it is often a brutal and savage war of attrition. But even if the Imperium crushes an Orc wall, The spores released by millions of dead orcs will settle on almost every world, and in a couple of weeks to a month, the planet will be ravaged by primitive orcs known as feral orcs. While these orcs rarely prove to be a major threat to the star system, like the wall that brought them, the planet must be careful to fully cleanse the planet and ensure the orcs cannot leave. In these situations, the Imperial Navy will order a quarantine of every planet in the star system until the orc threat is under control. Not all Xeno artifacts are found on sparsely inhabited planets. There have been hive worlds where its people might unknowingly be using these alien technologies, believing that it was ancient man during the planet's colonization that created these massive structures, when in reality it was an alien world to begin with. In this situation, the planet will be quarantined, but their inhabitants undisturbed. On these quarantine worlds, the remaining inhabitants are perhaps unaware of their status, knowing only that travel from their planet has been dormant for long generations, and such is the way of the Emperor's decree. On others, where the populace knows of their fate, many lose hope quickly and sacrifice themselves in an attempt to thwart any spread of the threat. A few, however, may be motivated to find a way to beat the odds and counteract the threat, whether it is killing the creature or pathogen or containing and eradicating warp contaminations. There are no records of any world ever being released from quarantine, though many planets have petitioned for generations, claiming that they have freed themselves of the taint. Escape from a quarantine world is very different. Leaving under one's own power is usually met with death at the hands of the gunners or interceptor pilots. Any craft detected leaving the planet's surface is hailed once and then eliminated. Stationed forces must conduct reconnaissance themselves, whether by scans from orbit or aerospace drones, and aircrafts doing more in-depth sensor sweeps on visual checks from within the atmosphere. It is in these instances that the local population may attempt to commandeer or stow away aboard these craft, seeking a one-way ticket to a larger orbiting ship where they can hopefully disappear within the ship's crew. People from worlds marked for quarantine face immeasurable odds in getting off the planet and staying free. Whether the individual lived there at the time of the event, was born afterwards, or has been to the surface, liberating inhabitants or scavenging for ancient relics, anyone who has been past the restricted point of the edict lives on borrowed time, depending on the nature of the quarantine and the amount of ordnance preventing the departure. Those who flee risk capture and execution, and therefore must remain on the run. It is no surprise that they seldom ally themselves with any singular group for too long. Anyone can come from a quarantine world, for it is the nature of the world or the accident that determine the need for enforced segregation, not the people. Adeptus Mechanicus research stations, agri-worlds, hive worlds, all of these have been a victim of an accident, condemning their inhabitants to live on gradual decline and eventually extinction. Those who survive and escape are some of the most versatile and resourceful people in the galaxy. They are also some of the least trusting and secretive, relying on themselves and often willing to strand comrades in order to stay one step ahead of the authorities. In the rarest of circumstances, the left hand of the Emperor finds these individuals and offers them a chance to stop running in exchange for their service. It is a very brave or very foolish person who refuses such an offer. While the life of a runaway holds a small chance of prosperity, the outcome of a quarantine world is never a positive thing. The Imperium of Man, the most well-known forbidden planets, are the homeworlds of the traitor Primarchs, most of which were abandoned when the traitors escaped into the Eye of Terror. Such was the fate of the quarantine planet of Prospero, the homeworld of Magnus the Red. Chosen by its settlers for the planet's isolated position, although it still remained far closer to Terra than many other human colonies settled around the Dark Age of technology, the civilized world of Prospero had only a few redeemable qualities. It possessed no independent resources, little contact with any outsider, and only a few sources of nourishment. The only reason for planting a colony there was because it was a very good place to hide, and thus became a large community of psychically talented and often physically mutated humans who would find no safety elsewhere in the galaxy. Although the planet protected the settlers from those that wished to see them dead, the strong psychic presence of the population attracted the rare but deadly warp entities known as Psychnuans. Resembling huge, spiny wasps, These warp insects were drawn to the souls of the unprotected or badly injured psychers. They then would lay their eggs inside the brains of the novice psychers and watch their progeny eat away at the psycher's brain. This Psychnuan plague persisted until the civilization of Prospero collapsed and the survivors fled to the city of Tisca. For thousands of Terran years, the people of Tisca endured, while all they had built in the millennia since leaving Terra fell to dust. The surface of Prospero was dotted with the remains of dead culture. Empty cities were overgrown with forests and vines, the palaces of their kings overrun with wild beasts. Those that remained survived by salvaging knowledge and equipment. They constructed techno-psychic arrays and substantial energy sources, which then allowed them to build giant hydroponic gardens deep in the caverns of the mountain ranges. They survived the Psychnuan threat by further developing the very psychic powers that made them so vulnerable. The Psychnuans were drawn to Tisca in their thousands, but the survivors were able to train their most gifted psychers to use their minds to erect invisible barriers of pure thought. They were known as kin shields. They were primitive, bombastic powers compared to the subtle arts later employed by the Thousand Sons, but they kept the creatures at bay. Even so, the practitioners of the mysteries remain locked in their limited understanding of the Imperium's power. That is until the arrival of the Primarch. Magnus unified its sometimes squabbling cults of sorcerers and set about rebuilding Prospero's civilization. Tisca, the capital, was transformed into a city of breathtaking beauty. Beautifully designed buildings in the form of pyramids and towers, composed of glass and marble, wide boulevards, paradise-like parks, and a constant, pleasing psychic background, resulted in the immediate bliss for all visitors. This period of peace, prosperity, and psychic well-being reflected on the world's population of powerful psychers, and Prospero became known as a planet of psychically and spiritually beautiful humans. The crown jewel of Prospero, Tisca, was saved by the chaos god Tzeentch during the start of the Horus Heresy. It now resides within the warp and is known as the planet of the sorcerers. As for the rest of Prospero, the surface is now a blasted ruin and has since been looted by raiders despite being marked as forbidden. Some traders decided to destroy their own planets before they fled into the warp. Such was the case of the Iron Warriors and Perturabo's homeworld of Olympia. It was an ancient, human-colonized planet in the marshes of the Ultima Segmentum, on the opposing side of the galactic core from Terra. It was one of a number of worlds in this region heavily settled during the Dark Age of technology. Having survived the Age of Strife largely intact, scientific lore and industry on Olympia had regressed to a fractured but largely pre-atomic industrial level. Most of it remained stagnant as sophisticated feudal cultures developed. Although relatively rich in organics and with a plethora of lithic mineral forms, much of its materials and easily available conductive metals had been stripped away and removed off-world, serving to restrict Olympia's progression technologically. Further complicating matters was the almost unbroken mountainous terrain which dominated Olympia's land masses and made large-scale urbanization and agriculture impossible. These unique conditions bred an equally singular culture, which evolved into a diverse patchwork of hundreds of independent city-states. These dominated and fought endlessly over the most fertile mountain valleys, sizable plateaus, and rich valleys in a shifting web of power and warfare. A secular, opportunistic culture given to the pursuit of wealth, security, and dominance. The Olympian arts of war evolved towards a sublime mastery of fortress building, siegecraft, and stone masonry. On Olympia, power was the ability not only to take resources, but to defend them. The mountainous terrain created abundance of high-quality stone, and the artisanship to put it to use made the fashioning of elaborate keeps to guard vital passes, and citadels to defend stockpiles of wealth and foodstuff essential. These artificer-created defenses were of murderous cunning and impregnable strength, and soon came to be the hallmark and measure of the greatest of the city-states and their rulers. 12 of the most powerful became dubbed by ancient traditions as the tyrants of Olympia. Warfare in this fractured realm was a complex game of cunning political espionage and assassinations mixed with all-out assaults. Olympia's wars were fought between mercenary armies of professional sellswords, and sieges were carried out by steel-plated creeper tanks, clanking steaming mortars, and hulking scout airships held aloof by volatile gases. The warlords who commanded Olympia's battles were only as loyal as the wealthiest of the tyrants, individuals whose rule was carried by the right of possession, bribery, and fear. Olympia was defended by the Iron Warriors during the Great Scouring. The planet held out for 2 standard years, until the few remaining Iron Warriors decided to detonate their missile stockpiles and leave the planet a wasteland. The Inquisition then declared the world perdita and quarantined the planet. When the Horus Heresy broke out, the Loyalist legions attacked their traitor brothers with unfettered rage. Such was the case for the Primarch Mortarion and his homeworld of Barbarous. All the worlds upon which the Primarchs were scattered, few were as terrible a place as this damned feral world, orbiting near a dim yellow sun in the Segmentum Tempestus. It created a thick, miasmic atmosphere of toxic chemicals. The most virulent of these gases rose through Barbarous's perpetual clouds towards the heat of its star, making the world beneath a dismal place of night, unbroken by starlight and possessed of short, shadowy days. When humans first settled Barbarous during the Dark Age of technology, the horrific environmental conditions from which they eked out a living quickly reduced them to a pre-feudal state. Unfortunately, the Age of Strife separated the planet from the rest of humanity. Quickly, the world became the domain of savage, alien overlords who ruled over and entrapped and preyed upon human population as cruel and terrible gods. The only atmosphere breathable by humans existed only in the lowest elevations, on flat moors, and in the valley basins of the jagged, stony mountains which spine the world. These unknown alien overlords were immune to the toxic soup of the planet's upper atmosphere, building great keeps of gray stone in the mountain's fastness. The true nature of these dark overlords, beyond their obvious connection to the dark entities of the Imperium, will likely never be known. What is known is that they reveled in the death of the humans that cowered from their power. Before the Battle of Terra, Barbarous was wiped clean by the Dark Angel's Legion, which carried out exterminatus using cyclonic torpedoes. Since then, this poisoned world was marked forbidden, even though its former classification of a death world is a deterrent enough. Some of these traitor Primarchs' homeworlds hide great secrets, such as the case of the quarantine world of Chemos. It was the homeworld of the traitor Primarch Fulgrim. The Imperial Dead World of Chemos was once a mining world, home to the Emperor's Children Legion and the Primarch Fulgrim. The planet is in the Ultima Segmentum's Aquitaine sector, and it was originally settled by human colonists before the Age of Strife, when warp travel became impossible due to the numerous warp storms that cut off the human-settled worlds from one another, forcing these isolated worlds to fend for themselves without the support of their human-settled neighbors. An ancient surviving text from that time, known as the Librum Ex Dominar, tells that Chemnos was one such world, an industrious mining colony dependent on interstellar trade for food. The planet's rulers made every effort to extract enough raw food from the harsh environment to feed their people, but Chemnos was a world dying a slow death. During its isolation, the archivists of Chemos recorded a picture of a bleak, unforgiving world, warmed by 2 small distant suns and surrounded by a nebular dust cloud. It experienced neither day nor night, only a perpetual gray twilight, in which the stars never shone. Settled long ago as a mining colony, the cities, outposts, mining centers, and towns of Chemos had fallen into decay since the isolation from Earth. Without resources from other worlds to sustain the people of Chemos, trade with other worlds ended, thousands starved, cities were abandoned, and eventually it fell down to a few hardy fortress factories to keep humanity alive on the planet. Short of food, water, and energy, the people of Chemos were forced to limit themselves to the meager supplies available. All citizens worked every waking hour, operating the vapor mines that drew moisture from the thin air, and the huge synthesizers that endlessly recycled food, turning yesterday's waste into today's sustenance. When not working, the inhabitants of the factory fortresses would march through the ruins of once great industrial cities, searching for building material, technology, and ruins of spaceships to strip for useful parts. Recreation, art, and leisure were sacrificed in order to ensure survival, and efficiency became the only value adhered to. Recycling efficiency grew, until finally Calax was producing more than it consumed. Seeing his people prosper, Fulgrim took pride in fostering the re-emergence of art and culture. reclaiming the spirit of humanity that had been sacrificed so long ago in the struggle for survival. Terraforming technology was reinvented, allowing forests, oceans, plains, and rainforests to spread from the reclaimed outposts and bring life to the planet. After the Horus Heresy, the planet, which was home to the Imperium's most beautiful cities and the Emperor's Children's fortress monastery outside of Kallax, was bombarded and everything was reduced to rubble. Chemos has since been marked as a quarantine world by the Inquisition, as hidden underneath the ruins of the once great planet hides the sacred scriptures known as the Chemosian Cantos, the heretical text that describe Fulgrim's worship of Slaanesh. The forbidden world of the leader of the traitorous Primarchs, Horus Lupercal, has suffered the most devastating fate. This quarantine world lost geostructural integrity and broke apart into asteroids and debris during the centuries following the heresy. Other accounts speculate that the planet was utterly destroyed, once marked as a forbidden world. The truth may never be known. Quarantine worlds will forever be places of mystery, and although many space travelers will be tempted to explore their surfaces, the horrible realities of these forbidden planets will never be worth the curiosity. And those were 40 facts on quarantine worlds. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, share it with your friends on Facebook, Reddit, whatever social media you guys use. It really helps out the channel when you do so. Also, thank our patrons on Patreon. It's because of them that we can do this. Link in the description if you guys want to support us. It's just $1 a month. We are also selling objective markers. So if you play the tabletop game, check out the link in the description. We have a set of 6 objective markers, and there is a limited amount for sale. So if you want one as a gift or just for yourself, the link is down in the description. If you guys have any suggestions for any other Imperial planets that you guys would like us to cover, please comment down below. Also, click on the link at the end of the video, which takes you to the playlist of all the different Imperial worlds that we have already covered. The most popular one being, of course, the Pleasure Worlds. So if you haven't checked out that Pleasure World video, link in the description or link above or at the end of the video. But thanks for listening, guys, and I'll talk to you tomorrow. This was Gershwan with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Oh, I used to put my freedom